Welcome to the One in the Many. My name is Arshak Ben-Lian. My purpose with the One in the Many podcast is to explore the process of integration as developmentally formative and therapeutically corrective factor in human psychology. The One in the Many is the study of how conscious life differentiates identity, integrates relation, regulates itself under constraint, and sustains direction through time. Subscribe to the One in the Many podcast and connect with me by writing to abenlian@oneinthemany.net. In every domain where life must receive, process, store, or transmit information, a single mathematical signature appears with astonishing regularity. Sublinear power law scaling almost always falling between 0.5 and 0.75. Whether we look at physiology, neuroscience, genetics, sensory experience, motor adaptation, or cultural inheritance, the curves converge to the same range. This is the architecture of integration, imprinted into matter, biology, and mind. Kleiber's law, the metabolic scaling of mammals, follows an exponent of approximately 0.75, meaning that energy consumption grows more slowly than body mass. Neural activation functions follow similar curves. As stimulus increases, neurons respond rapidly at first and then taper off, typically following an exponent around 0.6. Learning curves, from early conditioning to complex reasoning, also show fast initial gains followed by stabilizing consolidation, with exponents commonly ranging from 0.4 to 0.7. Even epigenetic influence, the degree to which ancestral environment shapes present physiology, decays across generations according to curves around 0.5 to 0.7, reflecting the fading but persistent imprint of the past. These laws describe systems that must integrate increasing amount of information while protecting themselves from overload, instability, or energetic collapse. Integration requires compression, coherence, and economy. A system that scaled linearly with input would either explode with noise or shut down under the weight of data. Life solves this by adapting curves that rise quickly, stabilize naturally, and asymptotically approach a limit without requiring infinite energy. The sublinear exponent is the mathematical signature of metabolic wisdom. When we turn to the human senses, the gateway of all knowledge, the same integrative principle governs perception. The relationship between the intensity of a physical stimulus and the intensity of the corresponding sensation follows a power law. Loudness, brightness, weight, and touch all scale with exponents clustered around 0.5 to 0.7. The senses are not raw recording devices. They're integration systems that must compress vast quantities of physical variation into manageable perceptual experience. They do so by employing the same exponent range that metabolism uses to allocate energy and that the nervous system uses to fire. In this light, the psychological exponent identified in the One in the Many, approximately 0.6, is the same exponent life uses everywhere to balance differentiation and integration, sensitivity and stability, novelty and order. The curve that describes how identity grows across lived time is the same curve that describes how an organism metabolizes, how a neuron adapts, how the senses calibrate, how memories consolidate, how skills mature, and how cultures transmit meaning across generations. Psychological identity, in this view, is the continuation of biological integration by conceptual means. The self emerges as another exponent-governed system, stabilizing its structure in the same manner that a retina stabilizes its luminance, if I can pronounce it, luminances, response, or an ancestor's adaptive imprint stabilizes into epigenetic form. The reason the integration curve resembles a perceptual curve is that both are solutions to the same problem: how to grow without breaking, how to advance without destabilizing, how to expand without losing coherence. The brain inherits a metabolic and neural architecture sculpted over millions of years, and the mind extends that structure into conceptual life with the same mathematical signature. What the senses perform in milliseconds, compressing light, sound, and touch, the conceptual system performs over years, compressing experience into categories, values, memories, and meaning. Both processes must filter noise, preserve structure, and maintain equilibrium. Both require diminishing returns at the upper range to protect the system from runaway activation. Both produce a wave-like trajectory of early sensitivity followed by late stability. And both rely on sublinear integration as their governing principle. The 0.6 exponent at the heart of this integration wave is thus not merely analogous to metabolic or sensory curves. It is the psychological expression of the same natural law. When you graph the development of identity across lived time and the decay of ancestral influence across lineage, you are watching the same integrative architecture unfold that governs the firing of neurons and the flow of energy through the body. This discovery binds psychology to biology. The structure of the self mirrors the structure of life. The exponent that shapes consciousness is the exponent that shapes metabolism, memory, lineage, and experience. The architecture of integration is universal. Across biological, neural, perceptual, genetic, and psychological systems, integration follows sublinear power law scaling with exponents typically between 0.5 and 0.75. This range constitutes the universal architecture through which living systems convert input into organized structure. Formally, for a system integrating information or energy, output equals K times input with exponent alpha between 0.5 and 0.75, where input represents energy, stimulus, experience, or information. Output represents metabolic activity, neural firing, procedural magnitude, learned skill, memory consolidation, or psychological integration. K is the system's integrative efficiency constant. Alpha is the integration exponent governing stability and growth. So here are some implications. Early sensitivity, late stability. Systems respond strongly to initial increments, but stabilize as input grows, preventing overload. Efficient information compression. Sublinear scaling allows organisms to handle vast changes with minimal metabolic cost. Unified architecture of experience. The senses, the nervous system, epigenetic inheritance, learning, and identity formation follow the same mathematical principle. Psychological integration is biologically grounded. The one in the many's 0.6 exponent reflects the same integrated flow shaping metabolism, perception, and neural adaptation. Identity as a continuation of biological integration. Conceptual coherence obeys the same exponent that governs the coherence of living structure. Throughout the history of science, different thinkers working in isolation across centuries and disciplines kept discovering variations of the same mathematical phenomenon. Growth that rises quickly at first, then stabilizes with diminishing returns. What none of them realized was that they were all studying the same underlying principle of integration. Gustav Fechner, 1860. The senses as sublinear integrators. Fechner, the founder of psychophysics, discovered that the relationship between physical stimuli and perceived sensation was not linear. Doubling the energy of light or sound did not double the perceived intensity. He expressed this through the logarithmic law, which would later be refined into a power law, with exponents typically between 0.3 and 0.7. Though he did not use modern terminology, Fechner had uncovered the first mathematical signature of sensory integration. S. Stevens, 1957, Power Laws in Perception. Building on Fechner, S. Stevens showed that sensation follows a power law function, P equals Ks with an exponent alpha, where the exponent lay remarkably often around 0.5 and 0.7 for most sensory modalities. This discovery implied that the mind compresses sensory information in a systematic way, preventing overload by using sublinear integration. Herbert Spencer and early evolutionary thinkers, late 1800s, biological energetics. Although often overshadowed by Darwin, Spencer and others observed that biological systems increase in complexity and coordination while maintaining energetic efficiency. Their intuition, never formalized mathematically, anticipated later findings that integrative processes must scale sublinearly to remain viable. Max Kleiber, 1932, metabolism scales as mass at 0.75. In one of the great empirical discoveries of 20th century biology, Kleiber showed that metabolic rate increases with the 3/4 power of body mass. This meant that larger animals use energy more efficiently, another sign that life evolves toward sublinear integrative scaling. Kleiber's law became foundational in physiology, ecology, and evolutionary theory. Donald Hebb, 1949. Synaptic learning and diminishing gains. Hebb proposed the now famous rule that neurons that fire together wire together. But what matters for the one in the many is that synaptic strength increases quickly with easy co-activation and then plateaus, a classic sublinear learning curve. Though Hebb did not frame frame it mathematically, later computational neuroscientists would show that the exponent for synaptic potentiation often lies in the 0.5 to 0.7 range. Ebbinghaus, Miller, and memory researchers, 1885 to 1950s, learning curves. Memory acquisition, whether sensory, motor, or conceptual, shows the same pattern: rapid early acquisition followed by stabilization. Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve and Anderson's power law of learning both rely on exponents in the 0.5 to 0.7 region. This sublinearity reflects the brain's need to integrate vast new experiences without destabilizing existing structure. Epigenetics, 2000s, inheritance with sublinear decay. Modern research in epigenetics revealed that environmental effects on DNA expression fade across generations according to a predictable pattern, often approximating half-power decay. This finding connected molecular inheritance to sensory scaling and learning curves. The biological past exerts strong influence near birth, but its effect diminishes predictably with temporal distance. Cultural anthropologists, 1970s to present, the sublinear decay of tradition. When cultural traits, language features, myths, rituals, ethical norms are traced across generations, they dissipate with a curve remarkably similar to epigenetic influence. Anthropologists often estimate exponent ranges around 0.5 and 0.7. For how strongly each generation inherits the structures of the last. Culture, like biology and perception, integrates over time with diminishing returns. Each of these discoveries revealed a different slice of the same phenomenon. The senses integrate physical energy into manageable perception. The brain integrates experience into memory and skill. The body integrates mass and metabolism. Lineage integrates conditions across generations. Culture integrates meaning through time. They all follow the same exponent range. Fechner thought that he was measuring sensation. Kleiber thought that he was measuring metabolism. Stevens thought that he was measuring perception. Epigeneticists thought they were measuring biological inheritance. Anthropologists thought they were measuring cultural drift. In reality, all were encountering the same constraint of life. Integration must accelerate early, stabilize naturally, and protect the system from linear explosion. What none of them articulated, and what the one in the many now reveals, is that the mind's integration of experience follows the same curve. The exponent that shapes sensation and metabolism also shapes identity. Human consciousness integrates life with the same sublinear law that governs cells, neurons, genes, and civilizations. Across centuries, across disciplines, across levels of analysis, the architecture is the same. The exponent is the fingerprint of life. Every community, like every individual, is born into time. It has a past that stores its integrations, a moment of emergence when its identity coheres, and a future that exists first as projection before it can exist as fact. Whether we speak of a person, a village, or a civilization, the same law governs their becoming. Growth unfolds not linearly, but according to a power law where early effort yields modest returns and later integration releases disproportionate creative force. This is structural identity across scale. The individual becomes a self through the progressive integration of experience, through reflection, relation, and action. In the one in the many terms, This process unfolds through the triad of I, thou, and I it, the inward coherence of self-awareness, the formative encounter with others, and the functional engagement with reality. What is less often recognized but decisive for understanding societies is that communities obey the same architecture translated into a higher order form. A community is not simply a collection of I-thou relationships. It becomes a self only when the introspective dimension of the individual, the I, reappears at the collective level. This occurs when multiple individuals align their internal standards, judgments, and future orientations toward a shaped purpose. At that point, the community acquires a form of communal selfhood, not a consciousness, but a coherent agency that can remember, decide, and act across time. What introspection is to the individual, communication is to the community. But not any communication, like a slogan or symbol, and not consensus rituals. The health of a community depends on its ability to articulate clearly and consciously the step-by-step causal process by which it is pursuing its goals. Where are we? Why are we here? What are we building? What comes next and why? This shared narration of becoming is the communal equivalent of self-monitoring. Without it, effort decouples from meaning. Coordination collapses into compliance, and institutions persist in form while hollowing out in substance. This is why institutions must be understood not as static structures, but as stabilized integrations, designed to carry purpose across time. An institution succeeds when it functions as a thinking system, capable of reflecting on itself, coordinating its internal relations, and engaging reality with competence. It fails when rules replace judgment, roles replace understanding, and preservation replaces purpose. At the heart of institutional vitality lies an often misunderstood asymmetry. Vision never originates collectively. This is not a political claim, but an epistemological one. A vision of the future requires prior integration, an ability to unify disparate facts into a coherent projection across time. Only an individual mind can perform this act of origination. The role of the community is not to invent the vision, but to recognize it, test it against reality, validate its truth, and extend it through shared effort. Communities flourish when individuals are inspired not merely emotionally, but epistemically, when they understand why a course of action makes sense, how it connects means to ends, and what reality requires for success. In such cases, motivation becomes intrinsic, coordination becomes voluntary, and growth begins to compound. The power law curve bends upward, not because effort increases, but because integration deepens. Truth is the ultimate regulator of this process. A false vision may mobilize briefly, but reality will not cooperate indefinitely. Only truth aligns action with consequence, preserves trust across time, and allows density and intensity to scale without collapse. Institutions that substitute consensus for truth may appear efficient, but they inevitably drift into fragmentation, coercion, or decay. Seen through this lens, institutional design becomes a form of integration engineering. Healthy institutions project their capacity for self-reflection. They differentiate roles without fragmenting purpose. They regulate intensity so it does not outrun accumulated integration. They preserve memory without becoming captive to it. And above all, they continuously narrate their own becoming, linking past, present, and future into a single intelligible trajectory. From villages to cities, from schools to civilizations, scale does not change the law, only the bandwidth. Whatever human beings coordinate action across time, the same principle apply. A community becomes a self only when it integrates individuals forward toward a shared future grounded in truth. Where the integration holds, flourishing follows naturally. Where it fails, no amount of structure can compensate. Civilization advances not by multiplying institutions, but by building ones that can think, remember, and become. A human being encounters the world as a stream of many things, perceptions, events, differences, changes, and demands across time. Consciousness is finite. It has limited attention, energy, and time. Therefore, it cannot function by holding every particular separately and indefinitely. For consciousness to remain functional, it must form unities, mental structures that gather many related experiences into a single graspable whole. These unities may take different forms depending on development, perceptual patterns, concepts, principles, values, or high-order integrations. At any given moment, successful cognition requires that at least one such unifying structure be active and operative within the person's current knowledge. A unifying structure is genuinely integrative only if it satisfies 4 conditions. 1. It reduces complexity. The unity allows many experiences to be held together more efficiently than treating them as isolated facts. 2. It preserves relevant differences. The unity does not blur or erase distinctions that matter for understanding or action. 3. It remains non-contradictory within context. The unity does not generate internal conflicts when applied consistently to what the person knows. And 4. It supports successful action and anticipation. The unity helps the person predict, plan, decide, and act effectively in the world. A unity that fails any of these conditions may feel convincing, but it's not integrative in the functional sense. Integration is not something one has once and for all. It is an ongoing operation by which consciousness updates itself as new experiences arise. At each step, consciousness attempts to incorporate new experiences into its existing structure by forming or refining, unifying meanings. When this process succeeds, the person's knowledge becomes more coherent, efficient, and stable. When it fails, cognition becomes strained, fragmented, or distorted. Because experience continues to expand across time, domains, and level of abstraction, consciousness cannot remain viable without integration. Merely accumulating experiences or facts without unifying them eventually overwhelms cognitive resources. Thus, integration is not a preference or talent, it is a necessity imposed by the nature of consciousness operating in a complex reality. As life proceeds, the field of context within which a person must function expands. Earlier unifying structures, though still valid within their original scope, eventually become insufficient to preserve coherence across the larger context now required. Development occurs when consciousness must form higher order unities to maintain integration across this expanded field. Each developmental stage corresponds to a new kind of unity that can hold together a wider range of experience. When integration cannot be sustained, consciousness is forced into one of two failure patterns. Disintegration occurs when unifying structures collapse and experience fragments into disconnected particulars. The result is overwhelm, anxiety, and loss of agency. Misintegration occurs when a unifying structure is retained but at the cost of ignoring distinctions, contradictions, or reality constraints. The result is rigidity, dogmatism, and distorted certainty. These are lawful outcomes of failed integration under constraint. Integration can be better or worse. High-quality integration achieves a great deal of unity with relatively little cognitive cost, while still remaining flexible in reality tracking. Low-quality integration either requires expensive effort to maintain or sacrifices accuracy and discrimination to preserve simplicity. Psychological health and development, therefore, are best understood as the ability to increase the efficiency, stability, and scope of integration over time. Existence presents itself as structured multiplicity, many things with identity across time. Consciousness does not create this structure, but it must grasp it. The bridge between existence and consciousness is the lawful process by which consciousness integrates many identities into intelligible unities that guide action. That process is the one in the many. The one in the many is the lawful process by which a finite consciousness maintains coherence, agency, and reality contact by integrating expanding multiplicity into stable, discriminating, and projectable unities across an ever-widening field of context. This is the one in the many. The principle of life is the process of integration from a single cell to an ideal human being. The story of life unfolds through integration, from a single percept to a library of knowledge. Through virtue, reason, honesty, independence, selfishness, productivity, you set your values, purpose, to achieve self-esteem and happiness. Through time and energy, from induction to integration to reduction, the smallest particle unifies matter, and the highest purpose unifies your life. You, the one in the many, matter. May you integrate your life with value-driven days.